to the Paranormal Peep Show for this month, where myself, Neil Ward and Ben Emlyn-Jones were invited to talk at Changing Times, a group in Burgess Hil in West Sussex that covers all sorts of paranormal and interesting topics. Ben and I covered the subject of messages through time and space. Hope you enjoy it.
Hello, we made it. Yes, we're here at Cyprus Hall at Burgess Hil, West Sussex. I'm here with Neil. We've had a long journey, but it's been good fun. And we're here at the Changing Times convention. Neil and I are going to do a two-part talk called Messages Through Time and Space. And we're looking forward to meeting the group. And you yourselves back at home on Paranormal TV will be watching it. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to this enormously, Neil. Thanks for bringing me here. Well, we're here in the Cyprus Hall. And we're just setting everything up. The team here are putting out chairs, and we're putting out up our tripods and our cameras, and we're getting our laptops ready. And Neil and I are going to be getting ready to proceed to do a really good presentation in about 45 minutes' time for the audience who are coming here today. And well, we're in the newspapers. We're in a couple of local rags, so that means hopefully we're getting some publicity that will get a lot of people along. Fingers crossed.
1, 2, 3, 4. Future meetings. So, have I covered everything I think I have? So, our guest this evening are Neil Ward, who has spoken here before some years ago, and Ben Emlyn-Jones. I mean, Ben's been a name, Neil's been a name here for so many years on this circuit, talking about the weird and the wonderful. And indeed, you should listen to the Paranormal Peep Show. It's a brilliant podcast, and you've covered so many things over the years. And now we're here, in the flesh. We're going to hear today about messages, not only from space, but also through time. But you know that, because you probably read the PR before you came. So I'm going to shut up, and we're going to give a big hand to a double presentation here, I think one after the other, with Neil Ward and Ben Emlyn-Jones. So, big hand. Big hand.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Changing Times. I have been here a few years ago. Can't remember everyone's faces, but it's certainly changed a lot since the last time I came. So thank you very much for coming out this evening to see a double act. We're not a comedy duo, but I wish we were. But you're going to see myself, first of all, and then my colleague Ben. And as Andy kindly mentioned, we co-host, along with a third member, the Paranormal Peep Show, which is a podcast that's been going about 10 years now. And Ben joined us in the early days and has now become a permanent member of the team. So that goes out once a month on the Paranormal UK Radio Network and also YouTube and Spreak. And I'll give you the details for that as we go through the talk. So just to introduce myself, my name is Neil Ward. You can call me Neil for short. And we're going to be talking about messages through time, which covers the Dodleston computer messages. Anyone heard of the Dodleston computer stuff? No? Okay, you're in for a treat, I hope. One of you has, thank you very much. And then we'll be moving from messages through time through messages through space, talking about disclosure, SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence and that kind of stuff with Ben. And I've been obviously, disclosure is now the hot topic everyone's talking about. I've been trying to gen up on it myself and trying to understand what's happening. So I bought a book the other day called How to Harness the Power of Anti-Gravity. I couldn't put it down. So, moving swiftly on from the dad jokes, we shall now begin tonight's talk. So, the Dodleston Messages. This came from a book called The Vertical Plane by an author called Ken Webster. He was actually a teacher working from Chester, or in the northeast. I'll give you a clue of where that was. And if you're interested in buying this book, I would suggest you buy the second edition of the book, because the first edition is really, really expensive. Second edition is more up to date. It's about £17 from Amazon. So just to give you a bit of background about myself, as well as doing talks for the Paranormal Peep Show, I'm also an artist. It's interesting to hear about Martin and the website of the artwork going forward there. So I'll show you bits of my artwork as well. And there's also some books at the back which you can take a look at as well. So that's some of the artwork I've done. It's pagan and visionary artwork, kind of goddessy, Lord of the Rings kind of inspired, but it's also done other stuff like portraits, cats, dogs, people, that kind of stuff. Recently done the Titanic for someone some years ago. And we've also done the Paranormal Peep Show, and there's a mysterious guest there, as you might recognise him. Did that a few months back. with Andy guesting with us for a time. I think he's been on there twice now, so that was a great show to tune into if you ever get the chance. We'll give details at the end. And I also do a little bit of mediumship, communication with the afterlife. I'm into spiritualism as well, but that's another talk for another day. But it just gives you a bit of a round figure of who I am. I mentioned the books there. The book there, True Tales of the Paranormal, which is based upon talks that I've done myself. So that's available. I haven't got any copies here tonight, unfortunately, but you can buy it on Amazon. The first book I did was Fairycraft. That's the book on the left in blue. I did most of the illustrations for that book. And the more recent one is the book on the right, which I think there's about 4 copies at the end, is Modern Mysteries of the Unexplained, where I look at mysteries from the 20th century and the 21st century and try and unravel them a little bit. So, as this talk is about computers predominantly, I thought I'd give you a bit of an introduction to what computers were like in 1968 and the kind of technology that was going around. Not many people probably realise that the first early video phone was in demonstration mode, at least in 1968. So here's a gentleman here in the United States. He's actually talking on a screen. I think it's through some sort of dial-up telephone network, and he's actually got a tiny sort of webcam thing up there that's seeing his colleague at the other end, and he's talking through the video phone to him. Now, of course, we didn't get these things later on until maybe 30, 35 years later with things like Skype and all these other kind of wonderful gadgets with webcams and things. But that shows that the beginnings of this technology was being thought of at that time. It would have just been too expensive for the average person on the street to harness. So our story concerns the use of a BBC microcomputer from the mid-1980s. People might have used those themselves in the mid-1980s or various versions of them. I certainly used one in the late 80s. But we'll talk a bit more about that particular computer as we go through the story. It doesn't just concern computers, it also concerns writings on wall and paper and things like that. It kind of moves off the computer eventually. So I first heard this story on the TV show Out of This World with Carol Vorderman in 1996. It is available on YouTube now, so if you find this story of interest, you can track it down on YouTube as well. And it concerns a communicator allegedly through time, can't prove it, and nor can anyone people involved in the case can prove it. It's just how it appears to present itself. So the gentleman here is a guy called Lucas. He's actually working under an alias, and he actually started to communicate through this BBC Micro, and I'll get into the details of that. So where does it take place? Dodleston. Dodleston is in Cheshire. It's right on the edge of the English-Welsh border. So there, as you can see, it's just below Liverpool. And I think Dodleston is on the English side of things, and Ken, who was the guy that experienced it with his girlfriend Debbie, worked across the border in Wales at a school. So just there it is. That you can see here, down the bottom, you've got Dodleston right at the base there, and up there you've got Chester. Now, it's interesting, I did a little bit of research into ley lines in the area. I'm not a ley line expert, but I was just curious myself to see how it worked. So you can see a big red line at the top of the screen there. That just runs north of Dodleston, and that apparently is a ley line. So we talk about ley lines later on in the talk. Whether it has something seriously to do with the phenomena, can't say for sure, but I thought I'd just mention it in passing. That's a bigger picture of where the ley lines apparently run through the country. And here's an older picture here of ley lines drawn by someone going right through the UK. Now it's interesting, you've got a line that runs right through London, which is just over there, and it actually runs right through Enfield, and that's the case of the Enfield poltergeist. Whether that ley line was responsible in part for the causes of that poltergeist activity, not sure. But this case does work a little bit on the poltergeist activity front as well. So, poltergeist phenomena, you can see there that the lines in blue, where is it now? UK, there we go, UK. Green is the UK, so you can see right up there, we've got quite a lot of poltergeist cases in the UK. This is from the period of sort of 1500 right through to modern day. And Germany, where the word poltergeist originates from, noisy ghost, has actually got more of the lower cases, which is interesting. So we're kind of in the UK, we've got more cases along with Italy, I believe. So it's interesting. You can actually see a kind of map of Europe there. That gives the kind of cases where they have occurred mostly over Europe. It doesn't show Spain, unfortunately, but you can see a lot of cases in Italy, a lot of cases in the United Kingdom. And these are reported cases, by the way. There's lots of cases that go unreported. I knew a couple that were in Hemel Hempstead, and they had lots of poltergeist activity, but they never reported it through official channels. So if you times that by so many, there's probably a lot more than actually that we believe there is. Now, the poltergeist phenomenon in general, this gentleman here on the right is Alan Murdy. He is actually a lawyer. So he knows legal stuff, but he also happens to be a member of the Ghost Club in London. So he's very interested in the paranormal. But he said in a podcast interview some years ago, he said, to the same standards of evidence we use in courtrooms, poltergeist activity is proven, which is interesting. So he says there's a lot of evidence out there and you can't refute it in a court of law, which is very interesting. So the Dodleston case concerns a gentleman, as I mentioned, Ken Webster, and his partner, Debbie Oakes. Now, you haven't got blurry vision. The gentleman on the left is Ken Webster, but he prefers to remain anonymous, and you'll see clips of him later on where he doesn't want to show his face. So I've blurred his face out. But ironically, over the years, I've found that he does turn up on YouTube talking about something completely different, about economics. So I'm thinking, okay, well, he's kind of gone public, but he's not talking about this stuff. He's talking about economics and things. So you can actually find his face on YouTube if you're really that curious. Out of respect for him, I still kind of thought I'd better blur his image. The lady on his right is his girlfriend, and this would be about 1984 period, 1985, when the phenomenon began. She is a little bit more out there. We've seen her at conferences, but she doesn't really still want to be that well known. So she still takes a step back from being too much in the spotlight. So the cottage that this event occurred in was Meadow Cottage in a place called Kinnerton Road in Dodleston. So you can see it here. It actually looks kind of nice and smart. But when Debbie and Ken moved in, they were actually renovating the cottage, trying to do this up. And it's actually interesting that when people start renovating cottages and old buildings, it kind of just tends to stir up things. That's when poltergeist phenomena and hauntings and things can sort of crack open and start their activity. Here's another shot of it from the main road there. Now this cottage dates right back, so I think this could be a rebuilding of the original cottage, because later on we find out that the cottage was burnt down sometime in the Middle Ages. Allegedly, that is. So this is a side view of the cottage concern. You've got the living room on the base ground, the bedroom in the top right, and they got a studio because they were musicians as well in their part-time. So I think Ken played the guitar and Debbie played the saxophone. But the majority of the time the computer was in use was in the back kitchen there. And so I'll show you some pictures from the actual case itself. Now here's some footprints. This is the initial thing. When they started renovating the house, they went to start decorating and found footprints going up the wall. Can anyone notice anything weird about these footprints? 6 toes. It explains how they could climb up the wall, doesn't it, really? Spider-Man, the ghost of Spider-Man maybe. But yeah, very strange. So they just laughed and decided to paint over them, but they did start to reappear later on. So it was quite a determined ghost. But it's also a very tidy ghost, this poltergeist, because he would stack up the cat food very neatly for them at the end of the day, which I thought was very nice. He's obviously one of these tidy holics or something, I don't think I'd make a very good ghost because I'm just too untidy. He also did strange things where he would stack up or balance things like frying pans on the edge of doors there. And you see here that you've got a chair, I think it's on maybe a high ladder or something, balanced on the top of the ladder, and then the ghost or spirit or whatever poltergeist may be has balanced this broom going across the chair there, which is very interesting. He could have his bad moments as well, though. So you can see there on the picture on the left, this poltergeist has thrown all the furniture, and this is in Meadow Cottage. It's not, not general pictures. It's Meadow Cottage. Thrown all the furniture to the left-hand side, and I ruled out Gordon Ramsay being in the kitchen. I'm pretty sure it was the poltergeist. But you can see that it's turned right over the oven and thrown things around there. Pots and pans have been thrown around on the floor. So it can have its days where it's not in such a good mood. Now, Ken worked as an economics teacher at Harwarden School. I always have trouble pronouncing that, secondary school in North Wales. As I mentioned earlier, he lived on the English side, but he crossed over the border to work at the school, where he worked as an economics teacher. And of course, I mentioned, you see him on YouTube now talking about economics. So back to the BBC Micro, where all this began, or most of it began anyway, was that Ken was using computers that at the time were being brought out in schools where people could learn basic computer, word processing, that type of thing. So he had a flatmate called Nicola, and she was writing scripts, and she wanted to try and type it all out professionally to present to the BBC or places like that. So he brought a computer home from school. He gave her lessons on how to use it, and basically she would type away and save her Word documents. But as you can see here, there was no Wi-Fi in 1984. No internet, no social media, no texting, very few mobile phones, limited email, dial-up modems apparently. I mean, I never knew they existed in that time, but there was something called Prestel where you could communicate with banks, and travel agents would use some sort of basic internet. So there's that kind of thing in existence, but not really most people understood it or worked with it on a home basis. There's no internal memory on these computers. Once you switched it off, it would forget everything. So you had to save everything to floppy disks, and there was certainly no laptop. So they're a basic standalone computer where you'd save everything to those little floppy disks, if you remember those. Now, as I mentioned, Nicola Bagley would write her comedy scripts on them, and sometimes she would just leave the computer on in the evening because she wasn't sure about it, she wasn't sure if she wanted to switch it off, she might lose it, and she was perhaps in the hope that she might work on it later on that evening. So they'd all go off to the pub down the road, the Red Lion, have a few swift drinks, and then come back, and maybe someone else would go to bed, and Nicola might just do the finishing touches to her script. But when she got home one evening, they found this mysterious message on the computer. And it's addressed to three of them, Ken, Debbie, Nick. Now, it writes in kind of riddles at the beginning. True are the nightmares of a person that fears. Safe are the bodies of the silent world. Turn, pretty flower, turn towards the sun, for you shall grow and sow. But the flower reaches too high and withers in the burning light. Get out your bricks. Pussycat, pussycat, went to London to seek fame and fortune. Faith must not be lost, for this shall be your redeemer. Very strange message. Written LW. Babe was convinced someone had sneaked into their cottage, left it as a joke, and they thought, oh, they'll find out who the culprit is sooner or later, but they never did. So basically, they discovered that these words, that as they started to come through the computer on a daily basis, they were written in, and most people have heard of Old English. This was termed early modern English. So as the Old English starts to die away, it was replaced by a language called early modern English. So it's still a bit archaic and hard to understand, but it started to be the basis of our modern day language as we understand it today. So on the right, I put a few kind of translations to help us. So it says, what strange words thou speak. And on the right, it says, what strange words you speak. It says, you are a good person who has a beautiful woman who lives in my house, he's saying. I have seen many alterations. He's obviously referring to the workings that they're doing in the house. It's a fitting place which light the devil makes and costly things Edmund Gray can afford or the king himself. So he's referring to people in his own timeline as well. And he's obviously seen the lights that were of the devil. So he also wrote, my good friend, my computer, now this is where it starts to get really interesting. My computer device is a wonderful thing, somewhat unkind. Your merrymaking pleases me, but it is somewhat noisy at times. And he's talking about their music. Okay. Will you tell your woman, that's Debbie, to play more of my recorder then? It is a blissful sound, I think. And she was a saxophonist, so, but he couldn't understand it. To him, from where he was, it looked like a flute of some sort or a recorder. So Ken decided to try and think, well, okay, I'm going to have a laugh back with this jokester, whoever it may be, and write back to them. So he says, Dear LW, because that's how it signed it. Dear LW, thank you for your message. What would you like us to do? Did you live in this house on this land in about 1620? Do you want to tell us more about your time? Thank you very much for your messages. Thank you for not making us afraid. Ken, Debbie and John. John was a lawyer friend of theirs who decided to get interested and try and help them understand what was going on. There's also another chap that got interested, and that was a chap called Peter Trinder. Now, he happened to be the head of English at Ken's school, so he knew a lot of English stuff, and Ken decided to print off reams of paper of these messages and take it into school and show Peter and said, what do you make of this? And Peter said, well, I think it's a fake, but I'll take it home and have a look. And he started to go through the old Oxford English Dictionary, looking up these really old words and thinking, I'm not so sure after all. So he worked with them over a period of 18 months to try and understand what the messages meant. Edmund Gray, brother of John Gray, lives at Kinnerton Hall. These were answers he gave to the people he had referred to in the previous messages. The king, of course, is Henry VIII, who is 6 and 40, signed LW 28th of March, Anno 1521. Now, do you notice there on the right hand side, there's question marks as well? Well, in those times, they never used question marks. I mean, in those times, they never used computers. So something weird is definitely going on. So this is Kinnerton Hall. It wasn't built in 1620. It was actually built in 1685. So what's going on? He's not getting his sums right. But we shall look into that and maybe have an explanation. So the age of king was given as 46, who was born in 1491. So LW year should be 1537 and not 1521. So again, he's getting his sums muddled up with ages. But as I say, there's some information there which comes to light later on, which might explain things. Ken tried to explain about how things happened in 1984, how people got about. He tried to explain about his Jaguar car. And Lucas, who is LW, this is the man writing from the medieval times, wondered when he said Jaguar car, he thought he was talking about some sort of cat or something like that. So he said, I'll leave a picture here for you. And so he left the picture, and the very next day, he found a picture burnt around the edges. Something weird had happened to it. So he wasn't quite sure what had gone on there. But Lucas replied concerning Ken's photo of the car. He says, "My goodly friend, I have found thy cart portrayed." In other words, I found the car photo. That's what he's saying. "But 'tis a good thing, for without mine horse it shall not go far." Without petrol it won't go far. No one's got any petrol these days. So we're going to go back to horses, I think. Now the local sheriff, in all these situations, it's always the local bad sheriff gets involved, doesn't it? There's always a baddie, and this is the local sheriff in this particular case. So basically, Ken receives a message from Lucas to say that he's getting hassled by the local sheriff. Word in Lucas's time is starting to get out about this thing that he's got and the messages that are coming through. Now, how things have changed things. "For mine unfavourable king's sheriff doth plague me so." In other words, I'm getting hassled by the sheriff. He says, "Methinks he is here for every turn of mine glass," which means every turn of the glass is an hour. Every hour of the day, this guy's here giving me hassle. "Mine king's sheriff be Tom Fowlhurst." So Thomas Fowlhurst there with the Jim will fix it badge. So basically, on another time, things were acting very strange. The poltergeist activity was warming up, and one day Debbie was reading a book on poltergeists, and there was a green blaze of light appear in the room. And she looked up, and in front of her, she saw this man in medieval garb that she took to be Lucas. And he looked confused, and he saw Debbie and tried to speak, but no sound was heard from him. So there's almost like an interaction through time. And Lucas decided to write through that very evening, and he said, "Me did see a fair maid." In other words, I saw Debbie. "It did so appear to myself to see her anew appear." It's hard to break it down, but he said it shocked him, basically, that he saw her. So he saw her from his time, and she saw her from her own time. But to each other, they appeared like ghosts in each other's rooms, according to their perspective on time of where they were. So Lucas referred to Ken's computer. This is where it starts getting interesting with the old languages. He referred to Ken's computer as a Leams Boist. Now, what on earth is a Leams Boist? Well, Peter Trinder, the language expert, the English teacher at Ken's school, suggested this translated to a box of lights, which is how Lucas interpreted what he had got. So Boist is box, Leams is illuminate or lights, box of lights, basically. So somehow Lucas was informing the people of the 20th century that somehow he was communicating with a box of lights from his period of time, or so it appeared. So he too had a box of lights that was given to him from someone from the future. Who could that be? In further messages, Ken mentioned he was from the year 1985, just to confirm it. He said, but Lucas thought he was like his friend from 2109. So in other words, Lucas is chatting to someone else, and someone else is from the future beyond us. So he said, my friend bought this box of lights. He brought me the Leams Boist, which I thought was very interesting. So how did Lucas obtain this strange device? Well, Lucas said that one day a man appeared out of his fireplace or chimney place in a blaze of green light. Now remember, Lucas appeared to Debbie in a blaze of green light as well, and handed Lucas the lean boist. And Lucas said, I saw a green light shining from thine chimney, and from this light I thought it was the devil himself. I didn't ever fear myself so much in my life, but God sent me an old messenger, him saying, do not fear, goodly or godly Thomas, goodly Thomas. Now, we talk about AI sometimes and how things can go wrong in messages. With AI, things go wrong when you're trying to create pictures. And I was trying to get it to create this image of a man coming from a fireplace. And I said, I've got a man from the future coming from the fireplace. It's a wise man bringing wisdom from the future. And it created a guy in a kind of Iron Man suit. And I thought, no, I don't want that. I just wanted to look normal bloke. So I kept normal man bringing wisdom. Normal man bringing wisdom. And it got it wrong again. And I think it translated, he brought me Norman wisdom over there, you see. So these computers, they'll be the end of us. So we also get visitors coming through our chimneys, don't we? Through our old records of things that happened when we were children, particularly we might have remembered Father Christmas coming down through the chimney. But it also goes back to Odin and the winter solstice. Norse mythology features an Odin entering homes through smoke holes or chimneys during the winter solstice, marking the chimney as a threshold between the spiritual cold outer world and the warm winter protected home. And St. Nicholas, Father Christmas, Santa Claus, the tradition of Santa Claus entering through a chimney is a widely recognised cultural narrative of travel where a supernatural entity navigates a chimney to cross into a home from the outside world. Now this goes a lot further than maybe people think, because in spiritualism they have these, particularly in physical seances, they have these things called seance cabinets. If you think of like a wardrobe, and here is Gordon Higginson, a very famous medium of his time, he's now a pastor of the spirit world, doing a physical seance. You can see this stuff coming from his mouth, which is ectoplasm, that would later form into a physical person, a spirit if you like. That's probably taken in infrared light or something like that. But he has to sit in this cabinet to allow the energy to manifest. Now, interestingly enough, many years ago in the mid-90s, I met a lady who said that, now she had not heard of spirit guides, she wasn't into spiritualism or anything, but she happened to mention to me that she saw a Native American person coming out of her airing cupboard. And he was trying to claw his way out. She could only see him from the waist upwards, and she thought she saw her husband behind him. And I kind of reasoned with her, perhaps this was a spirit guide coming and bringing her husband back for her. So, again, he was coming out of a cupboard. They're coming out of these box-like structures. So it seems to me that these box-like structures can act as portals between one world and the other. So maybe the story of this being from the future coming down the chimney in the story we're talking about is not so far-fetched. Maybe there's some substance to that idea. So Ken decided, he was curious about this 2109 person, whoever this person was. He decided to try and contact mysterious 2109, who delivered this box of lights to Lucas via his fireplace. So he typed on the BBC Micro, calling 2109, basically. And a few hours later, a reply came back from 2109. And it said, Ken, Deb and Peter, we are sorry that we can give you only two choices. Notice how he spells choices wrong. It says, one, that you either have your predicament explained, that you may have instant understanding, but cause what should not be to happen, or, number two, try and understand that you three have a purpose that shall in your lifetime change the face of history. We, 2109, so it seems to be a collective of people, must not affect your thoughts directly, but give you some sort of guidance that will allow room for your own destiny. So they're trying to explain themselves, but they're not saying exactly who they are, really. So Ken was getting a bit kind of fed up with this whole thing. He wanted someone to try and make it understand what was going on. So he decided to call the Society of Psychical Research, who began to investigate this case in May of 1985. So two people, Dave Welch and John Bucknell, visited Ken and Debbie and decided to try and test out this idea of messages coming through the computer. They would send Debbie and Ken away to the pub, and they would mess around with the computer and see if they could get messages to appear. And it's curious, the poltergeist activity kind of dies down when these people show up. It's like they don't want to play with these visitors. And they could not fathom it out. They had all these various theories about what was going on there, but none kind of fitted the bill. But during their investigation, Lucas actually wrote a message directly to 29. So between the computers, messages were flying from the past to the future, and Ken and Debbie weren't actually getting involved, although they saw the messages flying through. So this message is, pray tell, why do you move my script 2109? For me to switch to communicate with my friend John. That's one of the investigators. In other words, Lucas is complaining to 2109 about him changing the messages that Lucas is trying to write. Now, we remember at the beginning we saw question marks in some of the text. What I think could have been happening is this entity, 2109, was interfering somehow with the messages and putting his own take on things, like changing the dates, the years, things like that, and putting question marks, because they had no such thing as question marks in that period of time. But 2109 came back straight away to Lucas, and he was writing back to Lucas in early modern English, saying, do not speak with such men, or speak not with such men, he's saying. In other words, he doesn't want them to talk to the people from the SPR. He doesn't want them to find out what's going on for some strange reason. A few months after the investigations, both the SPR researchers Dave Welch and John Bucknell left without any explanation of what was happening. They believed the case was fake, but they never came up with any solid evidence of how it was supposedly faked. They were pretty much stumped. But that didn't stop them writing to the Chester Observer with their findings. They said to the Chester Observer, we did not get any answers, just waffle. And they concluded human agencies were responsible for the perplexing messages and nothing paranormal was going on. And yet they could not come up with any answers of how it was happening at all. So for them to come to those conclusions is a bit far-fetched, really, considering that later on Ken found out that no report was ever submitted to the SPR. Which is normally the case. You normally file a report to them and they stick it in their files. But the SPR investigator, Dave Welch, was found not to be known to the society anyway. So it looks like they had imposters working on the case. Now, as soon as these people left and went back to their respective places, poltergeist activity surged throughout the house and things were getting overturned again, chairs, pots and things like that. It was almost as if there was an anger in the air about these guys that had visited the place. Now, it's during the SPR investigation that the 16th century local sheriff, Sir Thomas Fowlhurst, who we saw earlier, who had been watching Lucas, and I've got the /Thomas there, we'll explain who Thomas is in a minute, had him arrested and imprisoned on accusations of witchcraft. And shockingly, the authorities had already executed Lucas's maid that worked in the house. I think she was only 14. Whilst he had put Lucas in prison, this sheriff managed to use this strange box of lights to communicate with Debbie and Ken in 1985. The sheriff was trying to seize the box of lights for his own power and keep Lucas in prison. And the strange thing was that every time anyone tried to use this box of lights apart from Lucas, it would almost go semi-transparent, was how they reported it. You know, we see it, but we don't see it. But somehow they could still use it. Now, some people think that what they were using in the Middle Ages was a BBC microcomputer. But Lucas explained how it worked. He said, we speak the words, and we see words flying in the air, and that's all we do. We speak the words. They don't do any typing whatsoever, and somehow the words get translated at the other end, which was interesting. So Ken decided to write back to the sheriff because obviously he didn't want Lucas to be imprisoned. So he used a bit of psychology, saying that if he did not release Lucas from prison, he would ensure that the devil would take his soul forever, because now he had his name. And in those days, apparently, if the devil knew your name, it meant the devil could indeed take your soul, and that put the fear of God into them. So upon hearing this, the sheriff decided to have Lucas released. And he says, if ye were not to use your power, I shall bring Lucas within 1 round of the glass, in other words, 1 hour. I do beg your forgiveness, but I meant to cause him no harm. I shall do this, for ye be my friends. You are my friends. He's creeping back to them, basically. So Lucas was later returned to Meadow Cottage and once more able to communicate with Ken, Debbie and Peter. But in return for his freedom, he was now forced to sell his house to a wealthy landowner. The word had got out. He's doing some witchcraftery sort of stuff, and they didn't like him in the village. So he had to move out, and this house was then passed on to a wealthy landowner, and he had to leave town. So 2109 came back with further information as a kind of warning about digging too deep for information, but also not to disrupt their experiments. So it looked like they were kind of doing experiments with time or something. So they said it's better to have no knowledge at all than to have a distorted view of the truth because of your lack of understanding. And it should say do not disrupt our experiments, but unfortunately it says disrupt our experiments, but it was warning, do not disrupt our experiments. Debbie mentioned to Lucas that the poltergeist activity had resumed in their cottage, and Lucas was also saying he was suffering from similar activity in his time, but also added this message: my advice be with you now that we speak privately. In other words, he wants to talk to her privately without 2109 seeing what they're writing about. And obviously 2109 was hacking in all the messages. But it's interesting that Lucas was also in his own time experiencing poltergeist activity in his own time frame. So he wasn't the cause of the poltergeist activity. It seemed to be a byproduct, or something else was causing it entirely. So Debbie, trying to bypass the computer, decided to do an experiment by placing a piece of blank paper onto the computer monitor with a piece of charcoal, and invited Lucas to write messages upon them. And the next day, hey presto, Debbie found a completed messages apparently coming from Lucas. It's almost like a very early fax, isn't it? The handwritten message from Lucas, it said, Brother Ken, I am much delighted we are by ourselves without 2109. In your book, because Ken was planning to write a book, put Tom. You will have knowledge of my name. It is the home place of Peter. So basically, Lucas is now here admitting that his real name is Tom, but he did not want people to know his real name because he feared repercussions. He's already been in prison. But now he's brave enough to say, you can put Tom in communications with me. And he said it's a home place of Peter, that's the English teacher, Harwarden. Now, he's saying his name is Tom Harwarden, or Thomas Harwarden. So the town is actually named after him. So as previously stated, Lucas, or Tom, confirmed to Ken that his real name was in fact Thomas, and he used the cover name of Lucas to protect his identity. Thomas later became the Dean of Brasenose College in Oxford. And remember, Ken also worked at Harwarden School, so his name was around the local area. Now, this is an interesting take on this one. It's where the story turns a little bit. So this is where another being emerges out of the chimney. This chimney is kind of like Poltergeist Central, really. So he says, he talks on one of his handwritten scripts that another entity has now appeared in his fireplace, again in green light. And he says he was not a very nice person, basically. And he's basically, he says, the green glowing visitor said he was from a time traveller, basically, known as the One. And according to Lucas, he was very arrogant, informed he had brought misfortune upon himself because of his involvement with the computer, and warned him that 2109 was out of control. So I think it's like the sort of time police or something, booking him for stepping out of line. Ken also asked 2109 why it was stopping them contacting Lucas and what made it of the poltergeist activity. And it replied, you refer to forces that you yourself have unleashed against our better judgment. Did they unleash it? I don't think they did. Maybe they did by decorating, I don't know. It is correct for you to assume that the poltergeist activity phenomenon is present in the communications. And 2109 also referred to the One, which it called the Force. 2109 was now counter-warning Ken and Debbie against this strange being called the One. The Force is usually an extremely foul entity which seems to thrive on strong adverse emotions, making little sense in its communication. It seems to play on an individual's fear. If you notice how it spells the word fear, F-E-E-R, that's not quite the way you spell fear. So again, some bad spelling on the part of 2109. 2109 later wrote to Ken almost in a concerned manner. We have reasons to believe that Lucas Wayman, you have his true name. If this is correct, you must say so, that we may rectify the problem immediately. You may now continue to write to Lucas to establish your responsibility to our experiments. Now, if they're in the future 2109, they would presumably have Ken's book and have read it and understood that he's already got the name anyway, but they've only kind of just discovered this. They're not quite on the ball with things, it seems. Maybe they're not from the future. Maybe they're somewhere else. So by September 1985, 2109 began to reveal itself a little more. It says, I know your greatest fears, this time spelled correctly. I can interfere with all signal transmitting devices, including computers. I have the power to make you do exactly what is required. So it's quite a bossy boots, really. And 2109 encouraged Lucas to continue to write to Ken and Debbie and Peter by using just paper to try and pass any interference from the being known as the One. It still thought this foul entity was somehow involved in these messages somewhere along the line. The green man who appeared to Lucas. Sorry to communicate this way, but we are trying to sort things out. Continue with experiments, spelt wrong. We'll do, look at that, we'll do our best. D-O-E, do our best. And our best is spelled A-R-E, R, not our. Terrible speller. 2109 later suggested a new research to help investigate the phenomenon. So it says this is a brilliant ufologist. His name is Gary M. Rowe. His ideas differ somewhat to yours, but nevertheless, he can help you with a couple of your problems. Now, I've heard about this Gary Rowe through people in the Welsh UFO Society, and they said that this guy, Gary Rowe, is a very clever guy, but he still never got to the bottom of this case. It still mystified him completely. It says, UFO researcher Gary Rowe was from Wales and called up by Ken using a telephone number supplied by 2109. He came along, did some tests with 2109, and even took away a secret message by 2109, which he sealed in an envelope, which has never been revealed to anyone, including Ken, Debbie and Peter. But he remained totally baffled by the case, and you can actually go onto YouTube and find interviews with Gary Rowe where he talks about this case. Now, as Gary Rowe was a UFO researcher, Ken decided to ask about UFOs to 2109. Now, we're getting back to the ley lines thing that I think we were talking about earlier. It says, time, UFOs and most other types of the paranormal are in some way all connected. And it says, in certain geographical locations, there is what we call areas of convectional magnetism, spelled incorrect, of course. So there we go, there's kind of an animation I've managed to get. So where these potentially power lines or ley lines or whatever they are, they cross, that's where you can get this strange phenomena occur. So it could be that it causes distortions in the time frame or the world in some way, and certain sensitive individuals can pick up on it in some way. So this is where things like from different times may appear possibly in other locations or realities. This might explain the phenomenon at Meadow Cottage. Debbie sees Lucas appear in 1985 and similar UFOs that appeared in the Chester area. Maybe they're all coming through these ley lines where they're crossing. Don't know, it's just a theory. So Lucas, as we mentioned earlier, was eventually forced to leave Meadow Cottage. It was sold to the large Grosvenor estate, and the new owners decided to burn down the old cottage as the old people of Dodleston feared it, basically. So he says, Grosvenor said that they then burned my old farmhouse down. So the original Meadow Cottage was burnt down, maybe not all totally, because obviously Ken and Debbie were owning it in 1985 and redoing it up. So there must have been some foundations and things still there. Lucas went on to become the Dean of Brasenose College in Oxford, and there is a record of a Thomas Harwarden, Lucas's real name, at Brasenose College, so maybe he does really exist. And 2109's last message in 1985 to Ken, Debbie and Peter read, Ken, Deb, Peter, true are the nightmares of those that fear. What you fear will be your reality if you let it. Believe in yourselves. As long as your kind cannot penetrate our world, we are safe. That's an interesting line. As long as you can't penetrate our world, we are safe. So maybe they're not from the future. They're in some other dimension, maybe. Turn, pretty flower, turn towards the sun. We're going back to that poem that was at the very beginning. For you shall grow and sow, but the flower reaches too high and withers in the burning light. It says, knowledge will be your progress, but your kind are coming too close to getting their fingers burned. Indirectly, you may prevent this. So 2109 said in the final message that Lucas wrote a book of his experiences, with both 2109 and 1985 and hid the book somewhere in Brasenose College. It says to date it's not been found officially. So it says Thomas did eventually write his book and soon died shortly after. He placed it in a secure place and it shouldn't take too many years to find it. Well, 2 years to find it. I mean, this was 16 something or other. Was that 500 years ago? We've been trying to find it for 500 years. We will finish now. Finish spelled wrong. There is no need for you to write back as we will have gone. Thank you for your cooperation, 2109. Oh, no problem at all. Ken and Debbie were interviewed by skeptical researcher Dr. Richard Wiseman. Anyone know of Dr. Richard Wiseman? A few people there. Of the Out of This World programme, which is the one you can see on YouTube, and may wish to hide their identity. And he passed on one of the Lucas writings, only one sample, not a whole load of it, for an opinion to Dr. Laura Wright of Cambridge University. It's important to know that Wiseman did not examine the handwritten text or examine any of the BBC microcomputers used by Ken and Debbie. I should also mention, actually, that although Ken was bringing back these BBC microcomputers, it wasn't the same computer. He would take the computer back to the school when the school needed it, and then when he wanted to use it again, he'd borrow another one. So there's like a pool of these computers coming out the storeroom cupboard. They could be any number of computers that were going back into the cottage that they were using, and they were still getting the same messages on there. So, I think here is where we play the clip. I'm going to have to put the microphone to the speaker because I can't get my little speakers to work there.
Looking at the verb structure, there are things which Lucas says that would not have been said in 1546. It's true that individuals can make up individual words, but we don't make up our verbs. It's possible, or it was possible in England in 1546 to say I do, thou dost, he, she or it doth, he, she or it does. But it wasn't possible to say I doth, or he, she or it dost. Now, all the way through Lucas's messages, he mixes and messes up these suffixes with the wrong subject.
Do you think it's some kind of hoax or forgery?
Well, it's certainly, if it's meant to look like early modern English writing, it doesn't even look close.
So do you think it's a sophisticated hoax by somebody who has a background in modern English?
No, if somebody had a background in early modern English writing, their hoax would look a lot better than this. I mean, they would get their verbal inflections correct. They wouldn't choose vocabulary that came from a period long before the period that this is supposed to have been written in. They'd do it a lot better.
We've had the Lucas's messages analysed by two experts. They have said that these are definitely not from the 16th century. They are like 20th century hoaxes. They don't have the right feel about them grammatically to be from the 16th century. What would you say to that?
I'd be interested to see the detail of it. This is, of course, what you, in a way, in many ways, you'd expect this sort of reaction. I suppose there's an academic in the land who would say, this is real. Not anybody wanted to keep their position.
So no academic will even admit to that being right. So they were only given one sample of handwriting, so it's not really enough to be a scientific study of the whole thing. So then we hear from Peter Trinder, who had been looking into the messages. Now, what's not mentioned in any of the clips of that program, it's only mentioned in the book, that Peter Trinder discovered many words through the text of Lucas, or stroke Thomas, that implied that this guy originally came from Gloucestershire, because he was using local Gloucestershire words that no one recognised. That's not brought out in that documentary. So let's hear from Peter Trinder.
Ken's friend Peter Trinder was checking the messages' authenticity.
If somebody was doing this as a hoax, they would have had to do one hell of a lot of research to organise this. All right, it could have been done. Somebody spent a long time doing this in advance. But what for?
Could it have been a kind of inside job? Because yourself, Ken and Debbie had access to this information. Maybe one of the three of you was hoaxing it.
Well, if it were me, of course, yes, it would have been done. But I would know. There would be no point in the whole thing. I can honestly say it wasn't me. I mean, but you believe or you don't believe. I knew that it wasn't me. And I did not believe that it could be Ken. Of course, always from the start. That was the assumption I started with when he first gave me this strange piece of paper over the school dinner table one day and said, do you understand this? And I said, well, let me take it home and have a look at it, knowing I got the dictionary. And I thought, well, now, this dictionary will soon prove that this is a bit of silly nonsense. But, of course, it didn't.
So, yeah, he went deep into it and he couldn't prove it was a fake either. So it was very interesting.
We've had the
I think I'll just go past that bit. So I'm just going to come to this final parts of the talk now, on my part anyway. So Lucas, Thomas seemed to be the most convincing of all the communicators, Ken Webster said upon reflection. He had a coherent, structured, emotionally grounded voice and text, detailed knowledge of the 16th century, and he had a fear of witchcraft and authority. Whereas 2109, the future entity, or wherever it's come from, it seemed to be cold and cryptic and supervisory tone. It claims of oversight and control, and it was full of contradiction and disruption. And he said, Ken Webb said, the 2109 communicator complicated everything. So the poltergeist phase, he said, it began to resemble classic poltergeist phenomenon. Now remember, the poltergeist was probably not causing the messages coming through. It just seemed to be a byproduct from what I can work out. It just happened with the energy that was being raised. It was bubbling to the surface, this kind of stuff. So 2109 was asked about how all this worked. How come we are talking to the past and the future? And it said that basically time, as we understand it, works on a vertical plane. So he says time is not linear, it is a vertical stack. So at the top there you've got the future, below that you've got the present, then you've got 1583 or the 16th century, and below that you've got the 11th century, and below that you've got ancient pyramids and also Stonehenge from 5,000 years ago. So all these times exist at once, apparently. So this is how we're able to talk to the past. I've tried to explain that in other talks to people. I've used the convention of a record. So in order to listen to a record, it has to play via a stylus going through the groove. Now, I actually decided to make it more obvious by using one of my own personal records out of my own personal collection. Whoops, go back a bit. There we go, the Crankies, Fan Dabby Dozy from my personal collection. So you can see there the grooves of the record, and the stylus plays on the grooves of the record as it goes round, and then it gets to the silent part, which is, you know, maybe when we die, if you like, and then we go to the next life, which is the next song on the record. Now, to play that record, you have to put the stylus on. You go through the tracks one after the other, but from a different perspective, when you look directly at the record, you see all those tracks at once. They all exist at the same time. And I think this is probably, hopefully, a good way to try and explain how everything appears to happen at once. So the interpretations, was it a time-travelling communication or parallel dimensions, the vertical plane as it was mentioned? This future entity appeared to be intercepting messages and changing them. Ley lines might have been involved in the communication, might have enabled it in some way. Poltergeist activity might have been a gateway or a byproduct of this thing. Was it some sort of psychological unconscious creation? Were they doing it without realising it maybe? Was it a hoax or deliberate construction? We may never know. And Ken Webster, to this day, still says, I still don't know what happened. I can't explain it. And so I wondered myself, why would 2109 might have picked Lucas to communicate with Ken in 1984? Why would it choose them for an experiment? And I was thinking, well, computers were just emerging onto the public arena. We started to get them from schools and people started to use them in the home, but we still didn't really have the internet. There were no emails, no World Wide Webs or anything like that. And because at that time, they were just emerging. But they weren't really connected to anything. And I wonder, this is the way the messages could not be easily dismissed as hacking or emails or anything like that. They were literally standalone computers. Maybe that's why it selected that time frame to make communications. But remember, it wasn't just making communications through emails. It was doing, Lucas was writing on scraps of paper and eventually started writing on the wall as well. So some final thoughts. I still don't know what happened, Ken said. Debbie Oakes, I still experienced what I experienced, it was very real. And Peter Trinder, the language contained features not easily explained as a modern imitation. So if you want to watch more of this activity, take an interest in it, I would suggest you go onto YouTube, type Dodleston Messages documentary, and you might find the episodes of Out of This World, but there's also lots of podcasts talking about it as well, if you want to dig deep. You can buy the book, The Vertical Plane, the second edition. I would not pay the 150 they're trying to ask for, the first edition, so 17 quid, not a bad purchase for the second edition. And in the second edition, Ken talks about some of the accusations that people have thrown at him about how he's using an early modem and he's dialing it up and he's got 1,500 emails or messages coming through this modem. And he said, if I was using dial-up in those times, using the only sole provider, BT, it would have cost me £87,000 in dial-up charges. So there's his bill there if you want to chip in. So, we mentioned briefly the Paranormal Peep Show at the beginning. So you can catch us on the Paranormal Peep Show, you can catch us on YouTube, and you can also catch us on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. That's the website there. And they can also give details on the website how you can listen to us as an audio version. You can listen to us on Spreaker via these apps, or Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. Any podcast app will probably find us somewhere along the line. And you can look at my artwork, which is examples of earlier, at neilwardart.co.uk. And the books are available on Amazon as well. And I think I've got some copies of True Tales of the Paranormal. No, not that one. Modern Mysteries at the back there. A few copies if anyone wants a copy. And just leaves me to say thank you very much. And we'll pass the floor now to Ben Emlyn-Jones. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Well done. Thank you, all of you, friends, enemies alike, denizens of the mainstream media. I was very pleased to see that we ended up in the local rag, and they did a really, really good article, very factual. So well done. Well done, the local press. Yeah, well, we're going to go from time to space today because I'm going to talk to you about SETI and UFOs. My name is Ben Emlyn-Jones. I'm a good friend and colleague of Neil, and I also have known Andy and Helen for a long time. And I've seen a few familiar faces here this evening, which is absolutely great. Thank you, all of you, for coming this evening. What I should tell you in advance, if I stop and sort of gasp for air, there's nothing really bad is happening. It's just I had a little accident on Friday, and I've got like some bruises in my armpit. I think I've cracked some ribs. So I sort of if I cough, it really does hurt. So please don't make me laugh, whatever you do, because that really is painful. Now, what is SETI? SETI is the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. You may have heard of that. I think if you come to this group, you've probably heard of that, and you've also heard about UFOs, of course. I should point out that the two are similar and have essentially the same goal, yet they are divided from each other. Wonder why that is. Now, we live in a very, very exciting era right now when it comes to space and what might lie out there. Do any of you recognise this chap? This is Avi Loeb. We have Professor Avi Loeb of Harvard University, and he is an astronomer, a very, very senior astronomer, who has come out with some really, really interesting opinions about the kind of things we talk about, especially strange objects coming through the solar system like 3I Atlas. And he's got what's called the Galileo Project, which is a study of UFOs. And he's not alone. There are many, many other people who are currently looking into these strange, weird subjects that never would have looked at them before. It's really, really quite something. And this here is, this is rudely christened the turd picture, because it looks like something that came out of some intergalactic toilet from a spaceship. It's actually called Oumuamua, and it is an object that came through the solar system in 2017, many years before 3I Atlas, and it is almost as interesting. There's evidence to suggest that this is actually some kind of intelligently created object, as was 3I Atlas, which came through the solar system last year. Now, the artist here is actually, it says the artist concept. This is not a photograph. The best actual photo we have of 3I Atlas is like a little red dot. This is what the artist thinks it looks like. And you see, the artist has actually deliberately made it look natural, like it's just a lump of space rock, like so many other asteroids and comets that fly through the solar system. We don't know that it looks like that. That's just an assumption, a complete assumption. And at the same time, we have this chap here, Jeremy Corbell, who he was on a TV show a little while ago, and he says he's absolutely 100% sure that we're going to be told there is a strange craft approaching the solar system from another planet. And he was absolutely positive about this. Now, some of you may think that sounds a little bit familiar. Any of you seen Three Body Problem? Yeah, you see, Helen, it's on Netflix or Amazon Prime. There's a book as well by a Chinese author that it's based on. Funnily enough, I don't have time to go into details, but some of the characters are based on people that I know in the UFO community. It's really, really weird. Not in the book, but in the TV series, where the actual characters are different. But what Corbell has described is essentially the plot of a three-body problem, which is about these creatures called the Trisolarans that live on this planet where there's three suns, which has three suns, and the planet orbits these three suns. And they're sending a fleet of spaceships to attack us, and it's going to take like 400 years or something like that. So, is that where Jeremy Corbell got his idea from? Or is it the other way around? Is life imitating art, or is art imitating life? This is the track of 3i Atlas. Now, 3i Atlas was really an amazing thing. This was actually in the mainstream news quite a lot. It was an object which passed through the solar system. Supposedly it was a comet. Indeed, it does have comet-like features. However, there's so many reasons to think it's actually something different. Avi Loeb has written in it so much about this particular subject. The fact there's coincidences, like it came close to all the planets. Could be a coincidence, but it seems unlikely. It's giving off strange chemicals, and those chemicals keep changing. All kinds of strange things like that. It's now left the solar system, it's heading back out into space, unfortunately. I did hope it would kind of sit around and say hello, maybe approach us or something like that. I mean, that would scare lots of people, but I would have been delighted if that happened. I'd be really thrilled. But it may have left something behind, we may find out. But we are not alone, it is a fact. Whether we're dealing with things that are millions of years away, millions of light years away, or, as I believe, they're already here with us. They exist. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence is not a scientific project as such. It's not a single thing. It is more of a scientific movement. It's something that involves several different individual groups and several different projects. But they all are based on the idea that we now have the technology using radio telescopes, radio astronomies, to receive messages from the great beyond, from up there, other planets. Maybe planets millions of light years away. Somewhere out there, there's some aliens who may be having the same idea. They may be trying to contact us. Now, there's one little problem with SETI, okay? The aliens have to be a long way away. They have to be a long way away trying to contact us by radio signal. They're not actually allowed to visit us. Now, this thing here, it's a strange looking thing. It looks like some kind of new shuttlecock or something for badminton. It's actually something called Project Daedalus. Now, this was designed in the 1950s by the British Interplanetary Society. This is a spaceship which could reach the nearest star in about 100 years. It works by detonating nuclear bombs behind it which propel it along. This works. It uses existing technology. Nothing new needs to be invented. It could be built today. And this is literally just 50 years after the first aeroplane took to the skies. So, given a greater advancement of science, it's quite likely that we will develop the technology at some point, maybe not too far in the distant future, and actually build something like this and go and visit other planets orbiting other stars, and therefore we will be the aliens in their skies. Yeah, but if any evidence appears that suggests that they themselves have managed to do that, according to the SETI scientists, we have to ignore it, because the SETI scientists are very anti-UFO. Where does it all come from, though? Well, this is Frank Drake. He's considered the godfather of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and he actually held a meeting here. This is the Howard G. Tatel Radio Observatory in Virginia, USA. And in 1960, he held a meeting, which is called the Order of the Dolphin, which is a strange name. And maybe because Peter Lilly was there. Peter Lilly is a biologist, rather eccentric one. He used to give LSD to dolphins. But there was other people there, including Otto Struber, the famous mathematician and statistician. And there's also a young astronomer called Carl Sagan. And that name has come up many, many times in this story because he's a very, very important figure in this particular discussion. And they held this meeting. And after several days of messing around, they came to the conclusion that the number of extraterrestrial civilizations could be calculated by what is called the Drake equation after Frank. And it works like this. Okay. N is the number of technologically advanced civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy. R is the rate of star formations, how quickly stars actually emerge in the galaxy. Now, FP is the number of those stars which have planets orbiting them, like our sun does. Now, when the Order of the Dolphin met in 1960, we had no idea what that proportion was. Today, we know it's about 70%. NE is the number of those planets that develop Earth-like conditions suitable for life. Now, again, back then, no idea, but now we know that's about 17%. 1-7. That's not 17% of the 70% of that have planets. That's 17% of stars. FE is the number of those planets in NE that actually develop life. Life as we know it, Jim. FI is the amount of that life that develops intelligence, which could create little handprints and things like that. FC is the number of those intelligent species that develop beyond handprints, and they develop the means to communicate using radio telescopes. And L is the length of time that those civilizations last. Now, in my view, Frank Drake and his team left out a factor on that equation, one which I call FM, which I'll come to later. Now, the work of this man's very important. This is Harold Urey, and along with his colleague Stanley Miller, in 1952, he developed what's known as the Miller-Urey experiment. They wanted to create artificial life. So they created an entirely sealed chemistry set. They put in some basic building blocks of life, sugars, water, ammonia, things like that. They heated it. They put electric arcs through it to symbolize lightning bolts, because apparently lightning was an important part of how life began on Earth. And they just let the experiment run for a while. Now, after a few months, strange things started to happen. Carbohydrates started to emerge, and all kind of other weird sugars and things like that, and even the amino acids and things like that, the basic building blocks of life. And it makes you wonder, if this had been allowed to run a bit longer, what would have happened? Aliens might have appeared. Artificial aliens, but not really artificial, because it's life. Because you often hear the phrase, the miracle of life. But life is actually not a miracle. Life is scientifically explicable, and it's completely understood. And what we know is that wherever life does appear, it clings on, and it keeps on clinging, it keeps on developing. Now, Carl Sagan, I mentioned him before, he came into the whole story in 1960, but he wrote a book in 1966 called Life in the Universe, which popularized this idea that I'm talking about here. He also wrote a novel called Contact, which has been made into a film by Robert Zemeckis, starring Jodie Foster. Have you seen that? Oh, Helen, I think, is our big movie buff. She's seen all the things that I've mentioned so far this evening. Yeah, that's worth watching, actually. It's worth watching. Now, the thing is, he was very anti-UFO. He said UFOs aren't real. Again, they're out there, millions of light years away, right? You can even talk to them using radio telescopes if you wait long enough, because it takes a long time. But on no account, because can they ever develop the technology to reach us, even though we know such technology is possible, because we are designing it ourselves. Oops. Hello, testing. This is the Carl G. Jansky Very Large Array. This is one of the most important tools in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. It's a very, very powerful instrument for finding strange signals from out in space. And believe it or not, it has found some. There are strange signals that have come from space, and I'll talk about those in a minute. This appears in the actual movie Contact. But it's not just about finding the signals. The signals may well have already been found. It's possible they've already been found. The problem is processing them. Let's have a little drink. More gin, please. Now, you see, it's not just the signal may well be already picked up. It may be lying on some magnetic disk somewhere in some laboratory, some database waiting to be processed. And indeed, because it's very difficult it's easy to pick these signals up, but to discern them from the noise that's out in the universe is incredible. Because the universe is a radio noise generating machine. It is constantly radiating all kinds of signals on every wavelength, every frequency, every amplitude. And it's worse than that. It's not just like listening for a signal. It's listening for a signal inside a rock concert venue, because the Earth itself does exactly the same. So how do you tell what's a signal from aliens and what is something else? What is something completely mundane? Because this has happened, actually. Frank Drake actually discovered, he thought he discovered a signal from the star SETI. Turned out it was a plane flying over the top of the telescope. But you see, these are some of the planets that we've discovered. These are 17% Earth-like planets. There's so many of them. Look, I mean, this is just a taster. They're bigger than the Earth. There's the Earth, see? These are all bigger than the Earth. And there's plenty of room on there for all kinds of creatures. Maybe some of them are actually here already. Maybe they have already arrived. There's been a few false alarms. This is Dame Jocelyn Susan Bell. Now, in 1967, she did pick up what she thought was a signal from the universe, and she called it LGM, Little Green Men. It turned out it was a false alarm. It was actually something called a pulsar, which is a type of neutron star that rotates and has a beam of energy in a particular place. It's like a little cosmic lighthouse. Bit of a disappointment there, but there you go. This sort of thing happens. That is actually what a pulsar looks like. But this is a lot more difficult to explain. On the 14th of August 1977, an astronomer called Larry Elner picked up this. Now, these numbers won't mean anything to you unless you're into radio astronomy, but he wrote "wow" on the printout from the computer. And this has become known as the WOW signal. It comes from, funny enough, quite close to where 3i Atlas emerged from, although I don't think they're actually connected. It's what it was on the hydrogen line, as it's called. So it was on the level of the basic energy of hydrogen, which has always been theorized that that's the way aliens would communicate with us, seeing as they don't know what frequency we use. They would assume that, because it's kind of like the most obvious one. I think that's a big assumption, but there you go. But this has never been explained. It's never been repeated, unfortunately. People are constantly scanning the skies from where the WOW signal came from, but unfortunately it's never, ever come back, which is a great shame. I wish it would. It'd be even more fun than Lucas actually popping in and saying hello on the computer. This here is what's it called? Oh, Kepler. The Kepler Radio Observatory, the Kepler Space Observatory. This again is one of the most important tools we have for finding strange things out there. And believe it or not, it actually did find something strange. It found something strange in one of the stars that it was actually looking at. It found, and this is an artist's impression of what it might have found. KIC 2468582 is the name of the star. Catchy, I know. But it has actually been nicknamed Tabby Star after Tabitha Boyadjian. She was the astronomer who actually discovered it. Now, Dr. Tabitha Boyadjian has done a TED talk about this, and it's really amusing to watch because she is absolutely desperate to avoid being associated with the likes of us. She doesn't have, I don't think she has the courage that Professor Avi Loeb has. She's not going to go out there on a limb, but she did say it's possible that what she discovered was the signs of this. It's a Dyson sphere, which is theorized to be an object that has been built by intelligent civilizations around their stars, as a kind of series of artificial planets. And now, there's no evidence that that's actually the case. We don't know for certain that Tabby Star actually is that, because Tabby Star is a long way away. There it is, it's in the constellation of Cygnus, but it's like about 200 light years away. And we don't know what is, it's too far away to tell. But if some alien civilization had built a Dyson swarm or a Dyson sphere around their parent star, that is the signature you would get. So what Tabby picked up through the Kepler Space Observatory is what you would find. So I don't believe there's any reason specifically to deny that that's what it is. Now, this is the Mars meteorite. Now, what they found on the Mars meteorite is possible signs of life. Now, if that life developed independently from the Earth, right, which is, people talk about how it might have flown through the space on a meteor, and maybe the chemistry went to more than one planet. But if it can be proved that it evolved differently in a different place from Earth, that's going to be difficult to explain as a coincidence, because one thing that people who deny the existence of alien life say is that it's a fluke. Life emerged on Earth, but it's extremely rare because it's so unlikely. We just happen to be lucky because we're actually here, we're on that actual planet. But the thing about it is, if life emerged on two planets next door to each other, that would be difficult to explain. Of course, some skeptics would say it's coincidence, but then a coincidence is a get-out-of-jail-free card that can be used to explain away anything in mundane terms. If it's physically possible, it can happen no matter how unlikely it is. You could win the lottery 5 weeks in a row. It's very unlikely. The odds against it are 13 million to 1 raised to the power of 5, which is such a huge number that it's impossible to imagine. But it's physically possible if you're in it to win it. If you buy a ticket, it could happen. And this is a problem. I've got a longer presentation I do all about skeptics and the mistakes they make. And the inability to declare a statistical ceiling, a cutoff point, where they stop crying coincidence is one of them. Now, there's one big problem with SETI, which you may have already spotted. What is missing from this activity? I'll tell you what it is. We're out there listening. We have radio telescopes pointing at the sky, listening for signals from above, from distant planets. But we're not speaking. We're not sending any signals ourselves. I mean, it could be we and the aliens like two people on the phone going like that, waiting for the other one to speak. Well, on November the 4th, 1974, someone decided to say hello. This is the Arecibo message. It was sent from the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico. Now this is all in binary coded. This is a radio message here, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense unless you put it into some kind of illustration like this. But I can tell you what these things mean. This is all about this is DNA. All this top bit here explains how DNA works. All right, that there is a human. That's an illustration of a human figure. That is how big we are, our average size. That is how many of we are. That's how many of us there are in binary code. This here is an illustration of the solar system here. You see, you have all the different planets here. The gas giants have more squares, so they're bigger. Now, the third planet from the sun is raised up, hoping that the aliens will understand that means that's where we live. And that there is an image of the Arecibo disk itself, and that there is the radio frequency that was used. This was sent to M51. This is a globular cluster. Problem is, if we take into account the speed of light as it's been conventionally known to be, it'll take 25,000 years for this signal to arrive. And if the aliens then decide to reply straight away, it'll take another 25,000 years for the signal to return. So it's going to take 50,000 years just to say hello, which is not really a very good way of doing things, is it? Yeah. But this endeavor has really, really gone a long way. For example, this is Breakthrough Listen. Right, this is the Breakthrough Listen team. It's all been funded by this Russian oligarch here, Yuri Milner. And you might see a few familiar faces here. There's Stephen Hawking, or his double, whoever it is. If you watch Rich Planet TV, you'll know that might not be the original Stephen Hawking. There's Professor Loeb there, and a few other people. Now, this is a privately funded SETI project, which has had some success. They've already detected a candidate signal called BLC1. And funnily enough, it is on the nearest extrasolar system to the Earth, Alpha Centauri, which is also where the Trisolarans come from in Three-Body Problem. How much longer will life keep imitating art, I wonder? Now, this is the golden record. This was placed on the Voyager probe. Now, Carl Sagan helped design this. This has messages here in various languages from the various people around the world, sounds from Earth, there's other sounds as well. This is supposedly instructions that the aliens will understand on how to build a record player. This is like a gramophone record, and anyone younger than me is wondering what the hell I'm talking about. Can you imagine iTunes on a black plastic dinner plate? Got it, kids? This here is a demonstration of where we are. This diagram here has been repeated elsewhere. This is on the Pioneer probe, another of these deep space probes here. And we have here, this actually is, this starlight thing is a strange thing. It actually measures the distance to various pulsars, the ones discovered by Susan Jocelyn Bell, which supposedly will tell the aliens where we're coming from. That there, I'm not sure what that is. I think it's something to do with hydrogen. Again, we have an illustration of the solar system, and that's the Earth, and you see the spaceship comes from the Earth there. And this is us, what we look like, and that is the spaceship, the Pioneer spaceship behind it, indicating how tall we are, how big we are. Now, the problem is, you see, this makes a lot of assumptions. Now, Carl Sagan helped to design this, but I mean, can we really be so have so much hubris that we think another species which is in a distant planet will understand that? Now, as you see, one of the human figures here has his arm raised like that. Right? Now, that is a universal human gesture. If you go to the middle of the Amazon jungle and you come across a tribe of people who've had no contact at all with the outside world, it'll be a very strange experience for you both, but if you make that gesture, they will understand it. It's actually a gesture of like friendship, saying it mentions it means I'm not a threat to you. But we don't know that an alien species will interpret that the same way, if they even can interpret this image at all. For all we know, that might mean we're coming for your grannies, in which case we'll be in big trouble. But anyway, this is now hurtling through space at 80,000 miles an hour. It's going to be picked up, it may be picked up by another star at some point, although that'll take a very long time before it reaches any other planet or any solar system. Now, this is Enrico Fermi, who's one of the is a very, very important physicist. He actually was one of the people who worked on quantum physics and one of the pioneers of that. Now, he asked a question, which is it's called the Fermi paradox. Okay, we live in a huge universe, there's lots of stars out there, lots of planets, many of them are much older than the Earth, many of them have the capabilities of creating intelligent life, in which case, where are they? Why haven't they contacted us? Why haven't they visited us? It's called the Great Silence as well. Well, the answer to Fermi's paradox is very simple. They have. This is where I completely disagree with all the SETI scientists. We have been visited. In fact, we are being visited. We share this planet with beings from other worlds who have come here and have been here for a very, very long time. Now, this is an interesting picture here. This is the crop circle appeared in 2002 at a place called Chilbolton in Hampshire. And it's an amazing image. It's like a dot matrix, like in the old newspaper photographs. You see this, it looks like a face. In fact, if you narrow your eyes, you can see it a lot better. And there was this. Now, this is interesting because this is the Arecibo message. It's the same one that was sent from. I'll show you the diagram of it. You see, this is the same message that was sent from the Arecibo Observatory in 1974. They've sent it back. The very same message. Or is it? Take a closer look. The DNA, this is the DNA diagram. It's completely different here. Okay, now look at the human figure. It's been replaced by an alien. That's how big they are. That's how many of them. Now, this is an illustration possibly of their home world. As you see here, there's these planets all raised up. Now, these 4 dots in a circle might indicate the moons of a gas giant. And this, no one knows what these symbols mean. But funnily enough, another crop circle appeared like that in another field. But here they are. These were found together. And then this one appeared in the same field the following year. And you see here, this is the grey alien. And this disc-shaped structure here has a message. Now, I did this presentation up in Holmfirth a few years ago. And someone came and saw me afterwards and said, I know who made this. This is just some people who made this. And I said, who are they? He says, I can't tell you. And they said, are you sure they made it, or they're making it up? Because I've known several different crop circle making teams claim the same design, that they made it. So either one of them's lying or they're both lying. What's funny enough, all these images appeared at Chilbolton, and what's nearby? What's next to that field where those images appeared? The Chilbolton Radio Observatory, a very sensitive astronomical instrument that has been part of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Is that a coincidence? Did those crop circles appear, especially what looks like a reply to the Arecibo message with an alien on it, right next to this? Okay. Do you recognise this guy? Yeah. Terence McKenna. Yeah, now he was a critic of SETI because he thought, well, we were assuming. He said SETI is like putting SETI is like looking up into the sky looking for a good Italian restaurant. Slight exaggeration, but I know what he meant. That's a great alien invasion arrival, that is. And now there's a symbol in here somewhere. Now you can see it actually. Look, this is the Karl G. Jansky Very Large Array, looking up at the sky here. But look what's flying above their head. A UFO. Now, is it possible to cover things up? I think the big question has to be, are things being suppressed? I believe that the government is suppressing information about UFOs, aliens. But is it possible that they're doing the same for SETI? Well, this is the Brookings Institute that actually did say in 1959, at the very dawn of the space age, that if certain things were found, including artifacts on other planets like we have here on Mars. Nexus magazine has covered this in great detail, by the way, and it's worth looking at that. It wouldn't be a good idea to shout it from the rooftops. It may be a good idea just to keep it quiet. The problem is that astronomy is very, very different to ufology. Now, and indeed, a crash retrieval of a UFO, like what you got at Roswell, is very, very different to a signal from space. They're very, very different in their implications, obviously. If something crashing on the Earth is right next to us is different to a signal from a million light years away. But they're also different in their flows of information. So, should we see some... I don't think it's actually possible to cover up a signal from space. There's too many telescopes, there's too many astronomers. So we might see this chap here standing there saying, I'm here to tell you today, ladies and gentlemen, that there are aliens. And, well, knowing him, it'll be on Truth Social first, won't it? What about this person? What's his name? Forgotten. He's not the most memorable Prime Minister in history, is he? I'm going to tell you, I'm here to tell you something interesting today. There are aliens. I didn't tell you before, but now I am. And who's the knobber now, Brian? This guy is, I think this man will retire rather than admit he was wrong. He really, really will. And this is Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's one of his colleagues. He's a more likable figure than Cox, but he's doing something very interesting. This is his new book. Now, I've not read this, but the promotional material so far indicates that he may be changing his mind. Or he's trying to rewrite his own history because he sees the writing on the wall. And he's banking on the laziness and the short memory of his followers not to fact-check him. So he knows what's coming, but he doesn't want to admit he's wrong, and he wants to get up the starting grid. If you want to know more about me, I have a website, Hospital Porters Against the New World Order, Herpanwo. And anything you want to know about me, just Google that, and you'll find everything you can about me, Ben Emlyn-Jones. I've also got some books. They are for sale at the back there. Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure. It's about these subjects and what would happen if we got the truth instead of the lies. And there's 2 sequels here. So it's the Roswell trilogy. I only brought 3 books with me because I had to carry them all the way from Oxford. And as I said, I got a cracked rib. And this is a good way to end. Look, this is just a perfect illustration, isn't it, of this situation. Look at the astronomers. They're staring up into space. And there's an alien having a wee right behind them. Thank you very much. You better stand up to that.
You've got 5 minutes if you want any questions. Q&A, 5 minutes, yeah?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Questions for either?
The disc in the crops, the alien one.
Yeah.
wasn't there some interpretation about it, a message?
There was a message, yeah. Yes, there is a message. I won't go into detail because we haven't got much time, but it's in ASCII code. It's like a computer code, and it's an extremely complicated thing, and there's no mistakes in it. It's all perfect. But it's an extraordinary thing it's one of the most extraordinary crop circles ever.
What's the gist of the message?
I can't remember the actual word, but it's like a...
I can tell you.
Yeah, you go on, Andy Hilton.
Beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain, but still time. Believe, there is good out there. And we oppose deception. And it ends with conduit closing.
There you go.
Wow.
There you go. Well done, Andy. You've got a good memory. Anyone else? You can ask.
No? The third dimension is physical. If a more advanced civilization had moved to the fourth dimension that was non-physical, would we still be able to detect that?
Well, no. What we would see is essentially a shadow in 3 dimensions of a 4-dimensional object, like a tesseract, it's called. So, for example, technically, if a hypersphere would look like a sphere here. So, if you step it down a dimension, like in the book Flatland, you'd see like a circle. It's actually, you can't actually illustrate a higher dimension, but you can imagine that we would perceive something, but it wouldn't be the whole object or the whole thing. You know. Anyone else? You can ask Neil questions about this as well. You want to ask Neil some questions too?
We're closing the conduit, so...
Yeah.
I'll ask you a question.
Ask a question.
In terms of the Dodleston Messages, what do you think, really?
Because I got a background... because I got a background in spiritualism, I found the idea that this being emerging from the fireplace very intriguing, because I know yourself, you report in your own book about spirit emerging from the fireplace with 2 witnesses seeing it, which is very interesting. So it seems to be a very common thing in those kind of areas, that the fireplace idea does seem to be a place where these spirits can emerge. Not all the time, but in a lot of cases. So this is back in 1984-85 that they were writing about it in this book, and no one really knew much about it then. Certainly these people that are skeptics themselves were looking at, and they thought someone was having a joke on them for really a long time before they started to really take it more seriously. And it was when the English teacher started to discover many of the strange early modern English words were actually possibly from Gloucestershire, which they wouldn't have known themselves. It starts to become even more intriguing. So I'm open-minded about it. I don't think they were faking it. And the fact is that they're not out there to make money from it. The fact is that Ken Webster's brought out a second edition a lot cheaper than the one that's going around, because he wants to try and correct a lot of the mistakes, a lot of the misconceptions that are going on. And also, they still want to hide mostly from the public eye anyway. So it's not as if they want the fame and glory from it. They just wanted to state the facts and put it down on paper so that there was a record of it, basically. So I'm a believer, certainly I believe it happened. Whether it was 2109 in the future and it was a guy in the past, I'm not sure. I just don't know. I'd like it to be, but I just don't know at the end of the day.
I'm curious, by the way, about the book at Brasenose College. I live in Oxford, and
you're going to go digging for it.
Yeah, I'm going to. Well, I'll go on one of the tours, and I might take a look under some chairs or something, see if I can see anything.
I had a message on WhatsApp from my dad's son. It wasn't sent. It was typed on my wife's phone, and she was washing out the other blood on, and she wouldn't touch the phone a couple times. And when she got back to her phone, it had been typed and to memory down you'd sent.
That's very interesting.
I hadn't been sleeping after his death, and it was just white as that. I know. So, yeah.
Brilliant, lovely message. There's a PS to my talk a little bit, whilst it just popped in my head to remind myself to tell you, is that someone sometime later, maybe a year after the original messages ceased, was curious, and they knew Ken, and they said, can we get out a computer and see, I want to ask 2109 a question? And he said, all right. So he rigged up the computer, switched it on, typed 2109, are you there? And this lady was left alone in the room with this 2109 entity. She asked it a question, he came back 5 minutes later, and whatever question it asked, or it sort of answered, she had fainted with fright on the floor. And he thought, that's it, I'm folding this bloody computer up and sticking it back at the school. So that's how it ended. Although 2109, the being has allegedly turned up, I think in Luxembourg, where they're doing ITC research, which is research into life after death via computer messages. So it's not an unknown phenomenon, receiving messages from the so-called spirit world, the dead, if you like. People like yourself and other people have received phone calls and messages through computers, so it's not a unique thing just to the story of Ken and Debbie. All right, thank you very, very much indeed for bearing with us, and we're glad you came along. Thanks for a lovely evening together.
Thanks for coming. Thank you for coming. Thanks, Andy.
That's brilliant, guys. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We've come a long way as well, so we're very grateful for that. So our next meeting, 18th.